All right, I don't know. We're missing something here. Oh, yeah, Barker. I'll be damned. It is Blair and Barker, nonetheless. We are keeping the name. Barker's just off for a day. Relax. Everybody relax. He'll be back. He'll be back tomorrow. And we've got a big show tomorrow, by the way. Thad Levine, the president, or general manager, I should say, of the Minnesota Twins, joins us. John Schneider, Blue Jays manager, and Justin Turner will be along. So that'll be a big show, and that's why it's going to require a lot of heavy lifting for Barker, so we decided to give him today off. The Blue Jays, of course, speaking of days off, are not playing today. They will open a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins tomorrow night at the Rogers Center. The Jays, I presume, enjoying the off day a little more than they have recent off days after their 5-3 win over the Phillies, gave them a series split. They have lost 4 series in a row, or they had lost, I should say, 4 series in a row going into yesterday's game. And so now we wait the Minnesota Twins and see what the next couple of days bring. I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know by now that Sheldon Keefe has been relieved of his head coaching job.
That is official.
With the Toronto Maple Leafs. Tomorrow we will hear from Keith Pelly, Brendan Shanahan, and Mr. Treliving regarding the direction the Leafs organization will take. Both, I would imagine, both the direction in general, but also a direction in terms of the head coaching job. So, safe to say that with that as a backdrop, and given the fact that the Blue Jays at 17-20 have not had the type of start that most people expected, and seem to have been plagued by one particular issue, although certainly in recent days the bullpen has emerged as I would think a bit of a flashpoint. By and large, the issue with this team, of course, as you know, has been scoring runs. So it's safe to say, I hate to say it, but I think it's safe to say that a lot of people go into this off day, just as we went into the last off day, wondering if maybe the Jays might not be in a position to make some sort of change, either with the manager or the general manager. We've had this debate for a while now as to who would get the blame for this, and how the Jays would go about rectifying it, and things of that nature. But look, even regardless of that win yesterday, the underlying issues surrounding this team are going to remain, and until this team rattles off a few wins in a row and seems to right the ship. I hate to say this, the folks in the front office, but this will be a topic of discussion. And now that the Maple Leafs have essentially moved on, I would suggest that the wider focus in general in terms of Toronto sports will settle in even more in the Blue Jays. So interesting times, to say the least, for the Blue Jays as they begin that 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins. Then the schedule, not that the Twins are a pushover by any stretch of the imagination, but then you've got games in Baltimore. You've got games against Tampa coming up. So the schedule certainly gets difficult for the Blue Jays. We'll be joined at 2:30 by David Samson, former Marlins president, host of Nothing Personal, the podcast. Dan Shulman joins us at 3:30. He is, of course, the Blue Jays play-by-play voice. And at 3 o'clock, Travis Sawchik, MLB writer with The Score, will join us. Big prospect/MLB news in that Paul Skenes has been called up. He's going to make his MLB debut for the Pittsburgh Pirates this weekend. He is the top pitching prospect in the game. A lot of excitement around him. And we're going to talk to Travis about something that I think is of particular importance to Blue Jays fans right now. Ken Rosenthal wrote about it today. And well, I'm gonna bring Shi Davidi in because it ties into something I want to talk to Shi about. Shi Davidi, MLB columnist and reporter with Sportsnet. Shi, thanks so much for joining. I was going to say joining me today on Blair and Barker. You know, one of the talking points surrounding the Blue Jays' offensive issues, of course, has been the idea that perhaps the organization would bring up Orelvis Martinez, their top position prospect from AAA, as a means of maybe kickstarting this offense. I mean, I've been pretty clear. I don't like the idea of relying on a minor leaguer, however good he is, to come up and kickstart your offense. I think it puts him in an untenable situation, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. But Rosenthal had an interesting piece today, and something I really hadn't thought of. But if you look at the prospects that have been called up recently, a lot of them have scuffled, right? Jackson Holiday is the one that really comes to mind. And Kenny's article spoke to people, to baseball executives and people around baseball. And one of the things they pointed out, Shi, and I'd be interested in your take on this, is that, quite frankly, the pitching at the AAA level is so bad right now, or at least not as good as it's been in the past by a lot of measurements, that a lot of baseball executives are starting to question the efficacy and the accuracy of what they're seeing from their prospects at AAA. I'm just wondering, how you feel about that, and in a broader way, whether or not you think there is a chance that we see Orelvis Martinez up here soon.
It's really interesting. I actually read that piece by Kenny this morning, and I thought it was a super smart piece. And the one thing that stuck out to me when I saw the metric measuring the difference in stuff plus year over year in the minor leagues is the number of pitching injuries that have occurred in the majors, and just how many teams have had to delve into their farm system. So a lot of the quote unquote 4A type of pitchers who would probably be driving that stuff plus up, and some of the pitching performances dragging that level up at AAA isn't there right now because it's in the big leagues. So, I've talked to executives, and they've said that right now, just trying to get your hands on any pitcher that has options remaining, that's a really, really highly demanded commodity right now. And I think that's factoring into the quality of what you're seeing at AAA. And so that does perhaps skew some of the offensive performance and makes the transition a bit more difficult. We saw that with Addison Barger, who was really hitting well at AAA when he got promoted. He got to the big leagues, and all of a sudden it's not immediately translating. The one thing that I would be cautious about is this a meaningful enough sample for us to draw conclusions from? Or right now, is this something, a trend line that we should just not pay too much attention to? That to me is where some of the debate lies. And if this continues to happen, that you keep seeing all these top prospects or all these young players coming up and they just can't transition because the pitching is so much tougher, well, then maybe we have something. But this could also be something that's just a single moment in time. And I think ultimately it's part of your evaluation as an organization has to be like, how good is our player right now? And, teams sometimes miss on that, but, that's where you have to be good. You have to really be honest with yourself about where your player is at a given moment.
See, that's to me, that's one area where the use of analytics in the minor league level can be particularly important and useful, because I would have to think that understanding that the technology available at AAA doesn't match what is available at the majors, although it's certainly better than it was, I would say, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I would think that organizations would probably have a little better idea about what is real and what is fool's gold with some of their prospects, because they're not just basing it on the eye test. They're not just basing it on the raw numbers. I would think that they're probably basing it not even on decisions, but on some of the the analytical and, if you want to call it, biomechanical measurements of the swing, all that good stuff. I would think that analytics should, in some ways, make that a little easier, or at least eliminate. I guess, to rephrase it, increase the margin of error for a bit.
Right, because you should be able to sort out the performance against different calibers of pitching, right? Where is it the journeyman guy who's just eating innings at AAA versus the guys who have a chance to really contribute at the big league level or have in the past contributed at the big league level. So I would tend to agree with that. But there are certain things where sometimes you just don't know for sure, right? And I think this is also one of the challenges that I think teams have been facing in terms of guys transitioning over from Japan or Asia, or from the Korean League, and then trying to extrapolate from their performance there how they'll fare against big league caliber talent. So it's the sort of those problems exist in the same way. Analytics do help. I think teams do feel like they're getting better in that regard. I think, it can speak to the Blue Jays having spent a lot of time refining their process from when they had Shun Yamaguchi and Rafael Dolis coming over to the type of work that they're doing now when they're making assessments of how different players who have performed overseas are translating here. But ultimately, you don't know until you know, and that's part of what every big league team has to cope with.
Shi, I'm wondering. I'm not saying this facetiously, but today is the day that the Leafs have parted ways with Sheldon Keefe, and we know that tomorrow is kind of the media availability with Brendan Shanahan and Keith Pelly and True Living, and I'm just wondering. Look, the Jays are 17-20. Yes, they did split with the Phillies. Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think yesterday's win was probably sort of what we're gonna have to expect from the Blue Jays going forward in a positive side. Is there any sense are you getting any sense at all, or any inklings or any indications at all that any type of change is imminent, either within the front office or in the manager's office right now?
Well, I'll say this. When Charlie Montoyo got fired, when the Jays made that change, you could tell it was coming.
Yeah.
Right? There was just a feel everywhere that this had run its course, that the Jays were quite literally, they had to do it to just change the way people were feeling about things. And, I wasn't on this past road trip, but before they left after that series with the Royals, I didn't get that sense that that's where the Blue Jays were at. And I think part of this is, the Blue Jays made their decision on Schneider in the offseason, right? After that game in Minnesota, to come back now and to fire him. Well, why didn't you do it then? If you thought that this was how things were going to play out, like if you had enough confidence to keep him then, do you change at this point in time? Now, I think you lose some of your cachet if you do that. Now, can circumstances get to the point where the Blue Jays' hands are tied? Sure, but I'm not convinced that what we've seen so far is enough to fire the manager. And you still see guys playing hard. I thought as much as that road trip was a low point in many ways, particularly Sunday in Washington, even more, maybe even a bit more so than the Tuesday in Philadelphia, the Wednesday recovery showed you that this team's not going to just roll over just yet, and that there still is something in there. So that's my feel right now. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. But I didn't get the sense that this is a team that's waiting on a managerial change the way that they were before Montoya was dismissed.
Yeah, that is, that's a great point. I obviously haven't been around the team that much this year, but having been around the team when Charlie was there, a little more. You really did get the sense, and you're right. If you're around a team on a daily basis, whether you're a club broadcaster or a beat reporter, you do. There are signs. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to sit down and write up a list of these are the things that tell me that a managerial move is going to be made. But there's just there's a different vibe. There's a different sense of, the answers get shorter. There's an increasing sense of reluctance, and you almost get kind of a bunker mentality that sets in. And everything we've been led to believe, you haven't heard. That doesn't appear to be the case. And I also think a lot of it has to do with the fact, Shai, that there are more people involved in the decision-making process now than there were in the past. I just think that's the way it is, especially with this organization. I mean, and I'm not saying that to denigrate them. I mean, this organization is process-driven. They do not make a lot of split-second decisions. They like to approach everything from multiple angles before making a move.
Right. And as frustrating as the past couple of weeks have been, and they've been really bad, it's felt quite bleak over the past couple of weeks. And I think there are a couple things that are important to remember. I think in part because of the stakes on this season and next, the fact that 65% of the roster is eligible for free agency over the next two off seasons. I feel like that amplifies the emotions around every hot streak or every cold streak, right? That it's almost like there's a daily referendum or series by series referendum on where this team is at and what they should do. And, that's maybe a bit more on the emotional side as opposed to the rational side. And, I think right now, I know that I speak to myself on a personal level. There's a bit of sort of trying to find out what's the right balance here. Mm-hmm. But it's also important to keep in mind. I mean, there's literally 77% of the season remaining. I calculated that number just earlier today. Like there is a ton of runway left, and if this stretch happens in mid-July or mid-August, you're not looking at it in quite the same way as you are early in the season. And then, and as we've discussed before, the other challenge this year is just trying to isolate it and not letting it feel like this is just 2023 bleeding into 2024. And that's entirely possible that's what we're seeing, but we're also seeing right now the worst of George Springer and Bo Bichette, and have been seeing the worst of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. That's not going to last for those three guys. When those guys start hitting, it changes things in the rest of the lineup too. It makes everybody else more dangerous. There's enough reason to think that this is not what it's going to look like all season. It could very well turn out to be that way, but I think to decide that on whatever it is, May 9th today, I think we're still a little bit early to say that definitively.
Are you surprised that, given the moves that John Schneider has made with the lineup in recent games, are you surprised that we're still seeing George Springer lead off? And I know that's kind of it's become a flashpoint. A lot of people, obviously. Do you see that changing anytime soon? And I know that the options. It's not like the Blue Jays have sort of classic leadoff hitters falling out of the trees right now. But do you see any potential change at the top of the order there, or do you think that whatever changes are made are going to be, it's going to be with the 2, 3, 4 spot?
Well, I thought it was telling on Wednesday that John Schneider said he hadn't yet broached the idea with George Springer. Mm-hmm. And so, if they're not at least talking to him about it or just saying, hey, what are you thinking here? It leads me to think that it's not imminent. Right now, could the Jays get in the spot? Can they score like 3 runs over the weekend against Minnesota? And all of a sudden you're like, we better do something by the time we get to Baltimore. Entirely possible. But my read on that was that if he hasn't discussed it with Springer yet, that it's probably not imminent. And I think the other piece that I think the Blue Jays are really considering right now is that guys are performing in certain spots in the lineup. And sometimes if you move someone who's hot into a different area and you're sort of in a quote unquote asking more from them or asking them to do something a little different, you can disrupt what had them in a flow at that point in time. And I think the Blue Jays are trying to be really cautious that the guys that are going, that you're not suddenly saying, hey, you need a table set for us right now because we're desperate for production. And that you want to just keep them in a position where it's like, hey, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't change. And then find a way to ignite others. And so that, to me, is sort of the big picture of how the Blue Jays are making these decisions right now. Yes, you've seen them sort of rally around a few people. Like David Schneider's been performing well. He's become, at least in the last little while, an everyday player. And they're eschewing some matchups because he's performing at the moment, and they're trusting in that. But at the same time, they're also trusting in, that George Springer is going to find his way, and that, I shared this yesterday on Blue Jay Central, that you look at George Springer's numbers through their first 34 games this year, first 34 games last year, and they're almost identical. And so George Springer has in the past pulled himself out of these types of extended funks. Is he going to get to the 850 OPS that the Blue Jays are hoping for him? That might be tough, but there is a higher OPS in there, and there is a better stretch in there, and one that, for the Blue Jays' purposes, they're certainly hoping comes sooner rather than later.
Last question before we let you scoot. Even with considering Jimmy Garcia's lack of availability since, I think, the 28th or the 29th of April, even taking that in consideration, it's been a rough go for the Blue Jays bullpen. Now, we have seen Ross Atkins in previous years move pretty early in the season when it comes to the bullpen, right? We've seen him add Adam Simber and Trevor Richards. Do you see that as being a particular focal point for the Blue Jays right now? Because Shi, I mean, even if Jimmy Garcia is healthy, you're still going to have some concerns over the fact that he has had a back issue. Those things can always flare up again. There doesn't appear to be a lot of minor league depth based on the amount of guys that that the Jays are just bringing in. Can you see maybe some sort of, I'm not saying a blockbuster deal, but some sort of move made by the Jays to bolster the bullpen in the short term?
I mean, if they see something to, come across the waiver wire that's intriguing, and they're like, oh, maybe this is some help, perhaps. But, even with Simber and Richards, those deals that you mentioned, those were late June and early July deals.
That's true.
Right? It's tough to come around. Then, to go back to 2016, when they got Jason Grilli, I mean, he was about to end up on waivers there. And that was really just throwing something on the wall, seeing what stick. And then Grilli came over, locked in, and he was great. So if something like that presented itself, sure. But to me, I think where they sit with the bullpen to some degree depends on what happens with Chad Green. Chad Green has been taking perhaps a bit longer or been working back at a bit of a slower pace than I think the Blue Jays might have expected initially when he first hit the injured list. And, he was going to be a big add for this bullpen, right? They committed to the 2-year set of options for him this year when they had the different contractual options for him. And, that's, I believe, $9 or $10 million on the books that they put there. Like, they needed him to be a big part of that bullpen. And if he's not there, that hurts. That definitely changes things in the late innings. And so does that mean that Yariel Rodriguez needs to come back and be a leverage guy? And that's certainly a possibility. I think at different points the Blue Jays looked at him as maybe someone who could go multiple innings for them, but he's got leverage experience in the past. He's definitely got the stuff for it. Maybe he comes in and attacks as a one-inning guy, and that's how he most helps his team. So I do think they have some internal options coming, but in terms of how aggressively you pursue external ads, especially ones of consequence, I think that to some degree, and maybe to a very significant degree, depends a little bit on what's the trajectory for Chad Green.
Shi, really good of you to do this, my friend. Thanks so much as always.
I appreciate it, Jeff. See you at the ballpark.
Absolutely. That is Shi Davidi, our MLB insider with Sportsnet. And again, the Jays have tonight off. They will open a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins at the Rogers Center tomorrow. And no, I do not know if the roof will be open. I don't even know. I take a look at the weather. I think the forecast is for a fair amount of rain this weekend. So, but it is getting around that time, right, where people start asking that question and start peeking when they drive in the Gardner and seeing if the roof is open or not. But again, tomorrow, the first of 3 games between the Jays and the Minnesota Twins at the Rogers Center. Justin Turner, John Schneider, and Twins GM Thad Levine will join us tomorrow on Blair and Barker. But for now, it's just Blair. And when we come back, David Samson, former Marlins president and host of Nothing Personal with David Samson, the podcast, will join us. Travis Sawchik and Dan Shulman as well. Busy Thursday. It's Blair and Barker on Sportsnet 590 The Fan and Sportsnet. All right, welcome back to Blair and Barker for a Thursday. It is an off day for the Blue Jays, an off day for Kevin Barker, but no off day for yours truly. Barker will be back on Friday as the Blue Jays open a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins at the Rogers Center. And we've talked a great deal about this in recent days. It's firing season in Toronto, right? The head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs given his walking papers today, and tomorrow the Leafs will host a media availability with their brain trust, and one would assume go over the reasons for getting rid of Sheldon Keefe and maybe kind of laying the groundwork for what is to come in the future. And of course, it is against this backdrop that the Blue Jays enter this homestand with a 17-20 record. Lots and lots and lots of questions about the Blue Jays. I don't think too many of them necessarily went away yesterday with that 5-3 win over the Phillies. Although, of course, anytime you beat a team as good as the Phillies, and anytime you get the type of pitching performance you got from Chris Bassett, and anytime you see the number of green shoots you saw from the Blue Jays in terms of their offense, there are positives to be taken. But I don't think anybody necessarily. Well, let's just put it this way: I think we need to see a little more before we look back at that game yesterday as being a turning point. David Samson is former Marlins president. He's host of the podcast Nothing Personal with David Samson. He joins me on Blair and Barker. Mr. Samson, as always, it is great to talk to you. So here's a question I wanted to ask you. We just had Shi Davidi on, and we were talking about the backdrop of stuff going on with the Blue Jays against the backdrop of the Maple Leafs. And Shi made a point about you kind of develop a sense when you think a manager is in jeopardy, people around the team on a daily basis. And he talked about that point where it becomes a series-by-series referendum on a manager. And I guess after the series-by-series referendum becomes the game-by-game referendum. What are the warning signs, or what are the telltale signs we should look for that a change is imminent? And I understand that every situation's got its own, it's unique, but I think there are some sort of overriding general trends, are there not?
Oh, there certainly are. And you're talking to the right guy, Jeff, because I did it so many times and I've done it all sorts of ways, some that worked, some that didn't. So I'd love to go through a couple of things that the front office does. Number one, you have to know what you're doing once you fire your manager. And that could be promoting your bench coach. It could be bringing in somebody from upstairs, somebody from the outside. You have to have that plan in place, because when you announce to the clubhouse and the media that you have let go of your manager, it comes with a concomitant announcement of here's what's next. Mm-hmm. And even if you have Brandon Hyde was our interim manager for a game because we had to get, for crying out loud, I can't remember, maybe Jack came back, whatever it was, there was a 1-day delay or a 2-day delay, but you have the plan in place. And in order to have a plan in place, you have to speak to the person who you plan on to be in the dugout, even if it's one of the coaches. And that is a hugely uncomfortable issue when you are having a conversation with the coach about the possibility of being the manager should there a change happen. And in order to do that, that starts with front office conversations amongst themselves, because once you go to the clubhouse and start talking, or once you start to talk to outside people, word is going to circulate back and it can create an issue. To this day, Mike Redmond, a dear friend who I love, he doesn't talk to me much because he feels we went behind his back before we fired him, talking to Bobby Valentine and others. And the answer is we did, because our owner said he wanted to make a change, and we wanted to wait until the moment where we had a plan in place. So it's not based on, do you win 2 out of 3? If we win 2 out of 3, we won't make a change. You don't do it that way, because it takes more than 24 to 72 hours to actually make the change happen.
I remember talking to Brian Burke when he was the Maple Leafs general manager about, I said, give me kind of a checklist of things that as a general manager, you go through. And one of the points he made is, I always keep I always keep my eyes and ears open for snipers. I said, what do you mean by snipers?
Snipers.
He said, when I start hearing from people that they've heard from people, and he's not talking about reporters, but when I start hearing from people that they've heard from people that this is an issue, or I start, of course, the old story, the unnamed sources suggest that the clubhouse is not aligned with the manager. And, I take Brian at his word because he was very matter of fact about it. But is that really a thing? That if you hear something from somebody, you will investigate further.
If our owner tells us he wants to make a change at manager, we're going to leak out that the manager lost the clubhouse. We're going to make sure it's out there so that the media has something to glom onto when they're doing its articles, or when podcasters this day and age, or radio shows, whatever. We need to give people an understanding. We need to give them a map to get to the conclusion that we're at, where we're making a managerial change. And even if there is no big issue in the clubhouse, if the owner wants to make a change, the owner will make sure that we get word out there that it wasn't the owner being meddling, that there were specific reasons, like the manager lost the clubhouse, like we're not pleased with where we are as a team. But it's funny. If you are the White Sox, you can't fire your manager and say, we're not happy with where the team is, because you knew exactly where your team was going to be when the season started. The Blue Jays, however, are an example where you can definitely use that if you want to make a managerial change in season and say, listen, we're below 500. We are more than 20% into the season, and we're not ready to give up on this season. We thought we needed to do it right now. And that is going to be a perfect map for those of us who critique these moves to hold on to and agree with.
The other things I've often wondered about is the idea, and this, of course, has also come up here in Toronto, with Bo Bichette and Vladdy, getting closer to free agency. I think Shi said 55% of the roster is eligible for free agency over the next couple of years. And that is the question about, who do you want retooling or dismantling things? Do you want the GM in place so that if it goes wrong, the guy who replaces him can say, hey, don't look at me. I mean, I came in here and most of the stuff was done. Or would you rather have, and maybe this is too easy or too simple, would you rather have a new guy come in and say, okay, go ahead and, fresh set of eyes, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera?
It's both ways. So look at Brandon Hyde with the Orioles. He survived a rebuild and is still the manager when the team is winning 100 games and has a chance to have a deep October run. Very often, your manager or coach who gets you through a rebuild does not survive to see it either work or not work. That's also very common. So it really does depend on the team, on the owner, on the individual. So there is no rule about that. Jeff, I want to mention one more thing that you can look for when changes are coming. You can look for very quietly what the team PR people are doing. Because when I say we leak stuff to national media. But when it comes to local media, we use our team PR department because they've got the better relations with local media. So we would get our PR people understanding of the messages we want out. And then the PR people spend time with local media people and you can listen and read between the lines of what they're saying to you. And that's another way to give a hint as to what the front office is thinking.
I know, moving on from the Jays a bit, I know that you addressed this on your podcast, but Dana Brown, the general manager of the Houston Astros, has come out and said, we're not, full speed ahead. We're not rebuilding here. We're not retooling here. I look at that team and, David, I look at that team and I look at some of the other underachieving teams that are doing in baseball right now. And I think, man, between the Astros, the Cardinals, and the Jays in particular, that you can kind of close your eyes and put together deals. Like a couple of those teams have what the other team would like, and vice versa. It seems to be kind of, first of all, it seems to be short-sighted to come out and say anything, right? As a general manager.
So just know that when Dana Brown is speaking, he is speaking for Jim Crane. Dana Brown doesn't make any decision within that organization. Jim Crane makes them all. When Jim Crane says we're not trading players, we're going to keep holding on to this. I want to lose 100 games or I want to make it back to the LCS, but we're dancing with the people who we've danced with for this number of years. That's his decision to make. And Dana Brown did not do that on his own.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't do anything on his own. Jim Crane was very aware that there was going to be a media availability, and that was going to be one of the messages out there. My personal view is I'm fine with that message, because if you're not going to give up and trade players, which Jim Crane will decide whether they will or will not, why not say out there in public, hey, we're way too good. Don't come calling to us, because we still think we're going to win our division and make a deep run in October.
I mean, I was when you put it that way, I'm trying to think of, there really is no downside to do that, is there?
So the answer is on that side, there's not.
Right.
The interesting side is that the problem is if you're doing that and the owner changes his mind and decides to sell, you look like a bit of an idiot that you came out and said, hey, we're going for it. We're good. We're fine. And then the next day they trade Bregman. Then all of a sudden people are saying, well, what, were you lying? And the answer is, well, no. Jim walked into my office yesterday and said, trade Bregman.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing about how owners and GMs work. The GMs are often hung out to dry, which is why most GMs don't say anything, because they know they're subject to the whims of the owner, and those can change like the days of the week.
We know that the Pittsburgh Pirates are going to call up Paul Skenes, the game's top pitching prospect, and that he's going to make his MLB debut this weekend. And there was an article Ken Rosenthal wrote in The Athletic today that I found really interesting, because, and I admit I wasn't keeping score of every hitting prospect that had come up and what they were doing, but certainly I was paying attention to Jackson Holliday. And Ken's point in the article was that, from talking to people around baseball, that essentially that the pitching is so thin at AAA right now that a lot of the offensive teams are wondering whether they can trust the offensive numbers that some of their prospects are putting up at AAA. Jackson Holliday being the prime example. Here, to a lesser degree, Addison Barger came up. He had great AAA numbers, came up here and scuffled. And it's kind of interesting to me, because it seems that pitchers are coming up from the minors and having a little more success than hitters coming up from the minors. Could Ken be onto something there? Is the pitching so thin now at AAA that you've almost got to look, you've got to look really carefully at the numbers prospects are putting up?
You're saying stuff that baseball doesn't want you to say, because there's going to be expansion. And one of the things the baseball people say is, we don't have enough pitching for 30 teams. Forget 32 teams. There's no way. Where are we going to find these guys? We're going to need like 10 Sid Finches to come out of the woodwork. But the other thing that people don't talk about as much is the time for development has really shortened, because owners are impatient and they want players who are cheap and good, and players' primes are happening younger and younger. You used to need, the rule was generally 500 at-bats in the minor leagues, minimum. 500 at-bats. There's some guys that if you get them 50 at-bats, hey, we're ready to roll. Let's go. With pitching, you know that Skenes is going to get hurt. You don't throw 102 miles per hour through your career and not get an arm injury. So why would you waste it at AAA? Owners would say to themselves, I don't care about AAA. bring him up here. And if he's going to get hurt, let him get hurt now, giving us something.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when you get hurt at the big league level, you're paid a big league salary and you're given service time. Therefore, you're getting closer and closer to arbitration and free agency. And when you're a team like the Pirates or the Marlins, the worst nightmare is when your young pitchers need Tommy John, because it's a full year of cheapness that goes away into the ether. For bigger market teams and revenue teams, it doesn't matter as much. So that's the give and take when you're thinking about when to call players up. And as for hitters, Jeff, I would say that if you ask any major league hitter, which I know you have, all they do is hit pitchers' mistakes. Garbage cans or no garbage cans, the best hitter in the world is only hitting a pitcher's mistake. If a pitcher can command, the pitcher will get the hitter out. And so I'm not surprised that you're seeing people scuffle hitters as they hit the big league level, because it's damn hard to hit.
You make an interesting point about expansion, and I hadn't thought of that, but I'm viewing it through the context of Major League Baseball also cutting down the number of minor league jobs in recent years, right, as the minor leagues have contracted. How difficult is it going to be? You're shaking your head.
I'm shaking your head because the teams they cut it's the crap. There's so many fillers who we could do without. If you go through a minor league system, here was what I was told by my baseball people. Let's say we have 5 teams at 25 guys each, just for easy math, 125 players. If you've got 25 big leaguers in there, you're awesome. That means you've got 100 people who might as well be in the California Penal League or working at Applebee's or on Wall Street. They're not going to be big leaguers. So when you say there's been contraction of teams, there's contraction of teams of players who aren't going to make it anyway.
But where are the if you have expansion, where are the extra bodies? Where are the optionable? I'm going to use it. Where are the optionable pitchers going to come from? You know, the 34-year-old guy who is, I don't know how many 34-year-old guys still have options. Let's say 27-year-old guy who's a 4A guy, but in an expansion team, he might be of some value. Where are those guys going to come from?
So you just called it. I don't know if your listeners know what a 4A guy is. That is a inside baseball term. It's someone who's better than AAA, but not really a good performing big leaguer.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of them in Toronto.
Well, but everybody has.
Right.
Every team has a bunch of 4A guys. They're your swing guys, your long guys. They're the ones who, when you have to eat up innings, you just put them out there with reckless disregard toward the health of their arm. You just don't care. And with expansion, clearly there will be more 4A guys in the big leagues versus in AAA. It's more jobs for the players union, although now they've got minor league players in that union, but it's more higher paying jobs. So it is not an issue for players. They want more jobs. It's an issue to me for quality of play. And I think it's something that baseball thinks about all the time when they're doing the math of how many good pitchers are there actually in the entire industry, and there aren't that many.
No, and it's and again, this kind of ties into as well. This as well as anybody. Nothing makes a game drag more than bad pitching, and even with the pitch clock and everything, if you've got surplus of bad pitching, you're looking at long games.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think fans mind when there's hitting happening and when people are running the bases and et cetera. I think no one wants to see people with command issues.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's nothing more boring than a walk, and we got rid of intentional walks, and that was that. But regular walks, people who can't find the strike zone, wild pitches, crossing up your catcher. I think people want action. Sometimes the action is Skenes, who's going to throw 102 and you're going to miss. Sometimes the action is, hey, we had a crooked number this inning, and how good does that feel? So I think that we're always looking to make the game more appealable to those watching and those engaged with it. And that can come both with a 2-1 game, and sometimes an 8-7 game can be compelling.
Last question. You've got to explain to me, and I know you talked about this on Nothing Personal as well. MLB warning teams against allowing players to drop out and reclassify as international players? Can you explain that to me? Because I had no idea. I swear to God, I had no idea it went on.
Oh, come on, Jeff.
I mean, I thought, I'm the guy that's surprised there's gambling at Rick's. So, I mean, boy, that's a dated
I'm
reference.
going to let you keep thinking that you didn't realize that this was happening. Here's the concept. Imagine the regular draft. It's called the Rule 4 draft in baseball, where when you're a high school player in America or a college player in America, you have to be drafted like the NFL draft. And the draft has an order. And you don't get to choose where you play. You have to go to the team that drafts you. I mean, there are rules that you can wait a year, but just pretend that's the case. Now imagine that you're a free agent. You could sign with anybody at any time. So what teams are doing is saying, don't you go to college. Here's the better idea. Go from high school in Tampa, go back to where you're from, get back to the Dominican or Venezuela or Mexico, get back somewhere, and then you will be declared an international free agent. There's no international draft. It's called international free agency. And do you know what cures this entire issue other than yelling at teams not to encourage players to do it? It's a very simple concept that we want. It's called the international draft. If MLB really wants players to not be cautioned or told to leave high school in order to be a free agent to come back and play for a specific team, make sure you have an international draft. And we tried it in the last CBA, and the players would not agree to it. And it ended up being traded for the qualifying offers, which you may remember. Right. There was going to be an international draft, but only if they couldn't come to an agreement, then qualifying offers were going to continue to happen. No. We have to make it a much different economic issue in order for the players to agree to an international draft. And once they do, that will take care of all of these issues, Jeff.
Yeah, the whole notion of the international draft has made a lot of sense to me for a long period of time, and I keep expecting every CBA that we're going to see it happen, and every CBA, you're right, it ends up getting traded off, or just, I guess,
because it hasn't been a priority. Owners, what you do before a CBA, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk about this in the next year and a half. You submit to the commissioner your order of your issues in order of importance. And so for the Marlins, of course, I wanted the international draft. It wouldn't even make my top 20 because I was far more concerned about revenue sharing. I was far more concerned about if there were going to be a salary floor. And so there were many issues that I had to focus on before that. And international draft is never in the top 5 for any team.
Yeah, it seems like it always ends up getting left on the cutting room floor. Thanks for this, David. Appreciate it as always. Be well.
Take care of yourself. Speak soon.
Yep. David Samson is host of Nothing Personal with David Samson. He's the former Marlins president host. I admit, I didn't realize that players dropping out of high school and going back to their country, I didn't realize it was that big a thing, but apparently it was. And of course, what we are talking about is a lot of kids. I shouldn't say a lot of kids, but there are kids from the Dominican Republic, for example, who will go to high school in the United States. And then they can go back to the Dominican and go into the international free agent pool. And as David says, there is no international draft. Something a lot of us would like to see, but for whatever reason, as I said, it always ends up on the cutting room floor. Travis Sawchik is the Score's senior MLB writer. We're going to take a deeper look into this concept of poor pitching at AAA and how it's impacting hitting prospects. Dan Shulman, the Blue Jays play-by-play voice, will also join us. And we've got tickets to see the Twins and Jays at the Rogers Center. It's Blair and Barker. Well, it's Blair on Sportsnet 590 The Fan and Sportsnet. Push the on button on, Jeff. Well, welcome back to Blair and Barker on Sportsnet 590 The Fan and Sportsnet. Jeff Blair. Kevin Barker has today off, much like the Toronto Blue Jays. But Kevin will be back on Friday, much like the Toronto Blue Jays, who will start a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins. My Minnesota Twins, of course, on Friday. Always a great day for me when the Twinkies roll into town. My childhood team. Dan Shulman will join us the bottom of the hour. He is, of course, the Blue Jays play-by-play voice on Sportsnet. We've got tickets to give away to see my Twins play the Jays at the Rogers Center. We'll do that in a few minutes. But very pleased at this time to be joined by Travis Sawchik, who is senior MLB writer with The Score. Travis, thanks so much for joining me today. As always, I appreciate your time. I was trying to figure when I knew we were having you on, I was going to spend a lot of time talking about Paul Skenes, who of course gets his call up with the Pittsburgh Pirates this weekend and is the top pitching prospect in the game. And I do want to talk about that, but I also want to touch on something that's kind of been a bit of a theme today based on something Ken Rosenthal wrote. And we've talked about it here because one of the issues with the Blue Jays, of course, as you know, is scoring runs. And one of the I guess, options people keep floating out for the Blue Jays is Orelvis Martinez, their top hitting prospect. But Rosenthal's story today really got me thinking about the number of hitting prospects we've seen come up this year and scuffle. And Jackson Holliday is the one that comes to mind immediately. And Ken talked to people around Major League Baseball, and one of the arguments seems to be, or one of the focal points seems to be that, we always talk about how thin pitching is. Well, guess what? If it's thin at the major league level, it's going to be thin at AAA. And the suggestion is that perhaps one of the reasons we're seeing guys come up with great numbers in AAA and then scuffle when they're up here is they're just not facing the quality of pitching at AAA they used to get. And I know that this is kind of in your wheelhouse. I'm wondering what you feel about that, sort of that hypothesis.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. It's a great question. And I do think we need a broader sample before making conclusions like that. And, I think even Willie Mays, started like 1 of 35 or something like that in his career. Mike Trout struggled. It's not unusual for the most talented player to reach the major leagues on the offensive side and struggle. Pitching's thin, but pitching's also more advanced in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think pitching development, because they start with the ball, because pitching labs proliferated before any advances really made on the hitting side, I think pitchers still have an edge. And I think it's very difficult to break in as a major league hitter. So I've seen other folks, suggest that trimming, I don't know if this was in Ken's story, but trimming affiliates has had a role. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know if that's the case either, because when the Astros were at the peak of player development under Jeffrey Luhnow, they cut affiliates, and their belief was now that we have all this measurable data, we know who the players are who have a greater than 2% chance to reach a major league. So we don't need as many minor league players, and we can view that as too, cutthroat in terms of player development or whatnot. But I don't know. I mean, it's a really fascinating question, but I still think it's almost a timeless baseball thing. It's really difficult to make that leap particularly as a hitting prospect, where you don't have the ball in the hand. You don't control what you're seeing. And it's probably been made, the gap is widening, and I think that's in large part because pitching development still has the advantage. You have the Edgertronic cameras, you have the spin, the Rapsodo, the spin, the breaking ball design processes, all those sorts of things, the velocity cams. I mean, major league velocity keeps increasing. The quality of breaking balls keeps increasing. So it is tougher than ever to break in. So, I'm rambling a little bit, but it is an interesting thing to think about. And I think we need to be more patient when we look at young guys struggle. I'm in Cleveland. I'm at the Cleveland airport right now, so I apologize for any background noise.
No problem.
Kyle Manzardo is their top hitting prospect, and we just saw him strike out in his first 5 plate appearances. And
right.
He's probably going to go on to have a fine career, but it's another example of how difficult it is to make that leap.
I think sometimes we forget, John Lowe, the longtime baseball writer with the Detroit Free Press, always used to have this saying that has always kind of stuck with me that, baseball is the one sport, I guess you could include cricket in that. It's the one sport where the defense has possession of the ball. And the first act of a baseball game is an inherently negative act. I have the ball. I don't want you to do anything with it. And I know it sounds trite, but I think so much results from that, doesn't it? It gets to your point as well about pitching labs. The game doesn't start until I throw the ball.
Absolutely. And you have pitchers now who I just wrote a piece today about the Seattle Mariners staff,
Right.
and they've really focused on the most difficult thing to teach is the great fastball. You can't really change the spin dynamic of that. Only through adding velocity can you change that. It's hard to change the shape. But what you can do, it's easier than ever to add a split change, add a breaking ball because of the high-speed cameras and the feedback loop, so, as I mentioned. So, Bryce Miller goes and has a very good split-finger fastball. And he's got like a 2.6 ERA and a sub-1 whip. I know Logan Gilbert got hit up a little today, but he's had a great start. And it's almost – this is what young hitters, all hitters are facing. It's these elite pitchers go in, they can just pick up a new plus pitch in one offseason. And it's harder to go revamp your swing, know. And they're starting, to your point, they're starting with the ball. So it is really, really tough. Now, of course, there's challenges on the pitching side. We know the injury attrition and what the modern velocity and practices are doing to the elbow and shoulder. But it is hard to step in the box and have success against, the league average fastballs 94, and the median max velocity any pitcher has is 97. I mean, that's just wild to me. Half of major league pitchers can throw 97 or faster when they rear back, which is wild. That's what hitters are facing. So good luck breaking into the major leagues.
Yeah, your article, the article in the Score was fascinating because, I think like a lot of people, I look at the Seattle Mariners, and yeah, they had good young pitching on it, but I look at the Seattle Mariners, I see Jerry Dipoto, and I just think kind of like the mad professor of trading. Right, the guy, it's almost he gets itchy palms if he isn't making a trade. But when you look at what they have done in terms of identifying not just good pitchers, but elite pitchers, it really is remarkable how they've been able to do that. And Travis, why don't more teams kind of adopt their approach? Or maybe they do, and they're just not as successful as the Mariners.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're still relatively new into the era of understanding what makes an elite fastball, and I think all teams understand that now, but we're still. It took a while for that to be widely accepted, and they made decisions to draft Bryce Miller, who struggled in his junior at Texas A&M in the fourth round, I believe, and Brian Wu, who's coming off the injured list soon. He was a sixth-rounder. They didn't have great college stats, but what they identified was they had these unique fastball characteristics, and they thought they could build off that, and they have. And it's the one pitch maybe you can add some velocity, but you can't teach it. You can't just you can develop a sweeper in one offseason and one bullpen session and work on it. You can't really change your four-seamer. So, I think Dipoto, being a major league pitcher himself, he's sort of, unlike most GMs today, he actually played the game. So I think he maybe had more of an innate understanding of what was really important on the mound, and that influenced some of what their analytics and pitching strategists focused on. I'm speculating a little bit, but I think that might be an advantage they had. And they're struggling to score runs, but what they've built in the rotation is something. It's one of the best groups in baseball, and a lot of it's homegrown and developed and identified well. And there's no substitute for drafting, developing, starting pitching well, because we see what it costs in free agency. We know how few owners are willing to pay for premium arms in free agency. So it's really the lifeblood of sustaining success, I would argue.
We will get to see another drafted pitcher, Paul Skenes, on the weekend. What should we expect? And look, I've seen him pitch a couple of times. I saw him pitch a game. It's spring training online. What separates him, Travis, from other pitching prospects?
Yeah, he's widely regarded as the best prospect to debut Bryson Strasburg. So, that's a special skill set. He's got probably 4 arguably plus weapons. He's a Verlander type where he can sustain 100 miles deep into starts. He's just an unusually gifted pitcher, and he has command of all these offerings. So we don't this combination of stuff, ability to sustain it in starts and command of it is just really rare. And that's why there's some debate about, you think about that draft class with the great college hitters like Dylan Cruz and Wyatt Langford. Should the Pirates, they have less injury risks. Should the club target those types of bats instead of the premium pitcher? But Skenes was so far ahead of, I would think most evaluators, if you put health risk aside, would say, yes, he's the number one prospect. And I do think a club like the Pirates, I know I'm getting a little away from your question, but because they're not going to be able to sign a premium free agent starting pitcher, this was their chance to acquire one who's ready. I think you could argue he's so talented that on the day he signed, he probably would have been the Pirates' number one starting pitching option. And that might still be true, although Jared Jones is one of the great pop-up pitching prospects this year, and he's been incredible to start. So they now have Baseball America's top 2 pitching prospects in the rotation, which is pretty wild. We're just going to see a special package. We really haven't seen someone like Strasburg, who had this command of premium velocity, multiple elite secondary offerings, and just a ready-made top of the rotation force. So hopefully he stays healthy because it will be fun to watch.
And I'm sure people remember what a big deal Strasburg was. I actually ended up going down to Buffalo to cover his final AAA start before the Nationals called him up. And I mean, it was a national media event. There were a ton of people down there, and certainly we're looking forward to seeing Paul Skenes. Hey, a question for you about the Blue Jays. I mean, it's getting close to, I think, the time where this organization has to have a really, really, and maybe they've already had it, but they've got to have a really deep discussion about where they're going with Bo and Vladdy. And by that I mean, essentially, do you play this out to the end, or do you move one of them, try to pivot off that and sign the other guy? Which of the two would have more value in the trade market, do you think, Bo or Vladdy?
Oh, that's such a tough question. I would lean Bo just because I assume the bat will bounce back, and you have a player who can play on the left side of the infield. But I don't know. That this is even a legitimate question. It speaks to just how disappointing a start of the season and where their kind of careers where they are as players. I would lean Bo, but I'm not. It would be interesting to take. Maybe we should do a executive survey around the game and see who has more trade value. But that's even a discussion point is so disappointing.
Yeah, it's one of the sort of the questions here, and I think in some ways we've been dodging it a bit. I mean, we've talked about it for the past couple of years, though, has been the lack of success in getting one of these guys signed to a long-term contract. Bo is signed through a contract that bought out his arbitration years, which in and of itself was odd, because if you'd spoken to anybody around the team 3 or 4 years ago and you'd said which of the two players is most likely to sign a contract like that, I guarantee you 99% of the people would say Vladdy, because it just seemed to be more important to Vladdy. I mean, he talked about it. He would mention it unsolicited. Bo took the team to arbitration a couple of times, all of that. It just seemed as if there was these two divergent paths, and yet here we are a year and a half away from free agency, and not one of them is signed. And I don't know, Travis, maybe in some ways, maybe it's if you signed one of them a couple of years ago and didn't sign the other one, people are going to put 2 and 2 together. And sometimes I wonder if maybe teams don't find themselves in a position where they almost can't do anything. It's either we got to sign both of them or we just have to play it out.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and you think back to their debut seasons early on in their careers. Toronto's a large enough market. Fans would hope these are long-term fixtures, players who signed extensions, but to be at this point, I think it's disappointing all around.
Last question before we let you run. You are in Cleveland. You saw Kyle Anzado. I'm wondering, the Guardians. We pay attention to them because of the Naylor kids, Josh Naylor's having a terrific year. The Guardians, can the Guardians keep this up, do you think?
Well, they're in the right neighborhood.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the AL East, that's
Right.
for sure. I think the neighborhood helps. The lineup has taken a step forward this year in part because of Josh Naylor, and I think his brother is going to have better days ahead. Another young hitter making that transition major leagues, not easy, and he's a catcher to boot and all those responsibilities. I think Manzardo's going to hit. Jose's franchise player. So, I think the lineup has taken a step forward from where it was, but crushed them as Shane Bieber looked like he was reverting back to his kind of Cy Young form. And he's out for the year with Tommy John surgery. They're known as a pitching development factory. I don't think they have the depth that they've had for the last few years. Gavin Williams, really promising young pitcher who debuted last year, just was moved to the 60-day IL this afternoon. So that's not, can they even count on him this year? He's dealing with an elbow issue. So they're a very smart organization. They develop players well. Stephen Vogt's doing a great job as first-year manager. I wonder about their depth, but I do think their overall lineup quality is better. They need Bybee and McKenzie. Ben Lively's been a shot in the arm in the rotation. They need those guys to stay healthy. But the division gives any competent team a chance. So there's no salary cap in baseball, but there are the Central divisions, which give the sport some parity.
That's a great point. Travis, thanks for doing this, man. Travel safely. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime.
Be well. Travis Sawchik, MLB writer with The Score, does a terrific job. You can follow him on Twitter at Travis_Sawchik. And his article on the Seattle Mariners starting rotation was quite eye-opening. Just the work that the Mariners put into identifying elite fastballs. Very, very specific target. And then the idea that, as Travis said, you can't teach an elite fastball. Yes, you can add some velocity as you get older and you get bigger, but the basis of the elite fastball has to be there, and you can teach somebody to throw secondary or a third pitch. But it's a terrific article, and as I said, something that you look at how good the Seattle Mariners rotation is. It wasn't. I mean, there's always an element of luck in these things, but it wasn't blind luck. There was a pretty pronounced approach on the part of the Mariners that continues to pay off for them. We appreciate Travis joining us. Hey, I've got tickets to give away to see the Twins and the Jays at the Rogers Center this weekend. We've been giving you a chance to win Blue Jays tickets all season long here in Blair and Barker. All you have to do is text the correct answer to our daily baseball trivia question to 590-590. The man who puts together the trivia question, the one who usually gets grief from myself and Barker, is Mark Boffo, our producer. Mark Boffo, look at that. He's got nice sneakers on.
Nice to be down here. It's a great studio. You guys seem to have...
Well, I keep telling you to come down here more often, but,
sometimes,
How come you're not in Barker's chair?
Big shoes to fill. I don't know. Let him... We're keeping it warm for him, It's fine.
I don't know. I kind of thought I just thought they would be natural. He could put him in there, but...
He's back tomorrow. He's fine. We'll just let it be there.
So our last trivia question and answer was, which player hit 2 home runs in Game 1 of the Twins Blue Jays AL Wildcard Series in 2023? The answer was Royce Lewis. See, that's not trivia. Trivia's got to be something that happened a couple of years ago.
Is anything trivia in the internet age these days? I don't know, but
I guess, but this one's more. Well, this one is now. I'm going to let you read this one. This one is good because
this one stumped you before the show. Let's be honest,
and only because I like to consider. I'd like to think of myself as a Twins fan, but this is just if you asked me to pick a guy. Well, read the question, because I wouldn't have picked this guy's name. I just wouldn't have picked this guy's name. Read the question. This is for, what are we saying, tickets?
May 12th.
May 12th.
This Sunday, Twins, Jays at Rogers Center.
All right.
And the question is, which former Blue Jays pitcher once threw a no-hitter for the Minnesota Twins?
See, I know who you're all going to say. And that answer's wrong, because that was the first thing. I mean, I jumped before you'd even finish the question and blurted out this guy's name.
Yeah, you blurted out the incorrect answer. It's true.
The incorrect answer.
One more time. Which former Blue Jays pitcher once threw a no-hitter for the Minnesota Twins? Text it in now, 590-590, your chance to win. Text the answer and see all the rules at sportsnet.ca/590.
Yeah, those rules include, I think, employees of the station aren't entitled to win. Is that correct?
That's correct. Right.
So it really wouldn't matter even if I'd gotten it right. It wouldn't have made any difference to my, my ability to get the tickets. I mean, I was disappointed in myself. I was disappointed in myself that I gave up so quickly. But as I said, I tried to run through Rolodex. And, I might have missed this guy's Blue Jays career, to be honest. Which would not leave me.
He's bounced around a lot. Like, I almost forgot he pitched for the Twins. But
yeah, very, very strange. And it's not that guy. I'm not going to say the name, but you're all thinking of the name. Twins pitcher, Jays pitcher. Nope. So again, read it. Which former Toronto Blue Jays pitcher once threw a no-hitter for the Minnesota Twins? Text the answer to 590 for your shot to win. Yada, yada, yada. See rules at sportsnet.ca/590. And you can get a chance to see the Jays and Twins at the Rogers Center on Sunday, May 12th. You going down to the Rogers Center this weekend to watch some baseball?
I think so. I'll be there maybe one of the days at least, at the very least.
I'm going to go down and watch my Twins.
Yeah.
Going to go down and watch my Twins. It's fitting we have Mark in here today, too, because we've got a really, really good show tomorrow ahead of the Twins-Jays series. Mr. Boffo, I like the lineup so much, I'm going to let you read it out to people.
Wow. Okay. So off the top, we've got
Try to sell it to the folks.
Twins GM Thad Levine coming on 2:05 p.m. Justin Turner 2:30. John Schneider 3 p.m. top of the hour, and then it's back leg line Friday. So if you guys got questions for Jeff or Kevin, send them in.
Wow.
What an endorsement.
Wow.
There's great endorsement from the folks behind the glass. And the back leg line number is 416-413-3959. If you call up that number, you'll hear Barker's voice. Don't pay any attention to what he says. Wait till it's done. Then leave your question or comment along with your name and location. And don't, as I said, don't just say Dave in Alberta. Yeah. Give us a location in Alberta. Perhaps we can poke fun at you. Maybe I've been there. Maybe I can do some research and I can pull something out to localize it, because all news is local. We got a scoop. Who's coming up next? Oh, Dan Shulman. I knew Shulman was coming up next. He is our Blue Jays play-by-play voice on Sportsnet. No Blue Jays baseball tonight, but the Jays will start a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins tomorrow. We'll talk to Dan about the lineup. We'll try to get to the bottom of the Jimmy Garcia stuff, and maybe also talk to Dan about Orelvis Martinez. And because my sense is we're going to hear his name more and more and more in the next week or so, if things don't turn around. Mr. Boffo, thank you for gracing us with your presence. And now people can put a face to the name. Whenever I insult our producer, call out our producer, poke fun at our producer, or indeed even congratulate our producer, that's what he looks like.
You're number one, Jeff. You're the best, man.
And he's single. Just looking after you, man. It's Blair and Barker on Sportsnet 590 The Fan and Sportsnet. All right, I thought that by getting our producer on, it would temper some of the abuse that I take from the people behind the scenes here. Clearly that clearly that hasn't happened. I guess we have to get all of them down here at some point. It is Blair and Barker for a Thursday. You'll notice that there is no Kevin Barker today. We decided to give him the off day. We figured if the baseball team could have an off day, Barker could have an off day as well. But rest assured, he will. There you go. Oh, I see we have the Hazel bobblehead there, so it's not as if. It's not as if.
I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, he can do whatever he wants. Anyhow, he'll be back tomorrow. Big show tomorrow. Justin Turner, John Schneider, Minnesota Twins GM Thad Levine joining us ahead of the Jays Twin Series. Dan Shulman is a Blue Jays play-by-play voice on Sportsnet. He'll have the call of the game, and he joins us on Blair and Barker. Look at you. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. That's a big show you got tomorrow. Clearly today is the appetizer and tomorrow's the main course. That's impressive guest getting by your producers.
It is indeed. You are the appetizer.
I am the appetizer.
You are the appetizer.
I've been called much worse than that over my 57 years. I'm good with that.
I'm sure you have. I know you guys talked about this. You and Joe talked about this during the telecast. And I understand the Jays beat the Phillies 5-3 and everything's good and everything. But I know that when John Schneider convenes with the media tomorrow, that the lineup will once again be a question. I thought it was interesting and frankly a little surprising that John Schneider said that he hadn't even broached the topic of moving George Springer out of the leadoff spot. And I believe him. I'm not saying I don't believe him. But were you surprised when you heard that as I was?
Well, he said he hadn't broached it with George Springer.
I'm sorry, with George Springer, correct.
Right. Like, I think we could, each put a couple of bucks down on the fact that it's been discussed in the coach's room. So, I don't think I was surprised about it because I don't think you would have that conversation until you were willing to make the move, to be honest with you. So I don't know why John Schneider would go to George Springer with that unless the decision had been made to make a change. But and I know you know this, but all you have to do is click on a certain website and you can see that a lot of people may not know this. Like Schneider's been asked about this dozens of times. It's not like he hasn't been asked. And I thought yesterday was his most extensive answer. And if you were watching the game, basically I kind of like I was transcribing and just quoting him in George's first at bat as the game began. And, Arden's written about it and Hazel's talked about it. You guys have talked about it. And all we can do is go with what John Schneider is saying. And among the things he said were, trust and faith and Springer getting back. Also, it was about, are other guys comfortable in their spots? And, if you're solving one problem, are you creating another? And I'm not saying I agree or disagree with any, with any of it or all of it, but I do believe when John Schneider says, this kind of situation is a little bit more delicate maybe than people understand that it is, I agree with that. And I know it's about wins and losses, and this is the get it done league, not the try hard league, as was once famously said. But I do think it is a little bit more complicated. That having been said, I would have guessed by now they would have made a change. And one thing that Schneider did say yesterday is, if it goes on, I don't know if he said a week or two or, I don't know if he gave a time period. I don't think he did actually. But he said, if it gets to the point where you're, quote, banging your head against the wall, then you've got to make a change. So I don't know if it's coming. I think this next week is big. This Minnesota-Baltimore week is big. Minnesota's good and Baltimore's great. And, if the Blue Jays can go 3-3, that's pretty good. If they go 1-5, now they're 18-25, and that's not so good. And I think decisions may be made earlier on this team this year than generally teams make decisions. I think the next week to 10, then you got the Rays after that. So I think the next 10 days or so is really big for the decision makers in this organization.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, one thing that I have to keep reminding myself is, something Felipe Alou always used to say, and it probably wasn't one of the most memorable things Felipe said. There were a number of them, but we do have to keep in mind that the manager knows his player for the most part. He knows his player, and you know what you can do, what buttons you can push and you can't push. I'm not saying anything. I'm not denigrating George Springer here or anything, but John Schneider, I think, and the coaching staff, they will have a handle on what you can and cannot do. Because the one thing you don't want to do is lose the guy. Any
Yeah.
player. You don't want to lose the player.
Yeah. One thing, and it took me a while to learn this, but again, doing games, obviously, I'm down there every day and I get a chance to talk to the manager, sometimes in a group setting and sometimes individually, or could be a coach as well. Is I've learned to become more careful about, well, how could they do this, or why
Mhm.
didn't they do that? Because you know what, maybe Jimmy Garcia wasn't available, and that's why so and so was in the game, or this guy was under the weather, and that's why he didn't pinch run, or whatever the case may be. Now that's a micro thing. That's a specific situation in a game as opposed to a batting order. But I agree with you. There are things that they know that we don't know, and sometimes we're not supposed to know everything, or we're not allowed to know everything, even as we try. I've thought about, and I don't know if you and Barker have done this on your show, like if you were to change it up, what would your batting order look like? I mean, that's everybody's favorite game, right? Is what the batting order look like. So the easy question is, who would be the leadoff hitter? And you could, I guess you could make a case for 4 or 5 different guys. I don't know if it's in any of their best interests or if any of them are actually ideal for that. And that's the thing too. If you had an ideal guy to step in there, maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe some of this has to do with personalities and what guys have accomplished in their careers. Maybe some of it has to do with not wanting to move a guy up into too big of a spot. If you're moving Bichette down and you're moving Springer down, and you start to think about what the batting order looks like, it gets a little complicated. Like, are you going to put those two guys 6 and 7 in the order? I don't know if they're ready and willing to do that, and maybe that's not under consideration. But yeah, it is a little bit more complicated. Again, as I said before in my first answer, I'm a little surprised it hasn't happened already, but I don't think it's the easiest thing for them to do. But bottom line is, whatever the order is, for this team to be good, they've got to score more runs.
Mhm.
And for them to score more runs, everybody's got to hit a little bit more. Springer's got to hit more. Bichette's got to hit more. I have Vladdy in a bit of a different category now because he has hit more the last 10 days. And I think he should be discussed a little bit separately. Kirk's got to hit when he gets his opportunities. And he has shown signs lately that he's coming out of it. But I don't care who hits first and who hits ninth. If they don't get decent seasons out of Springer, Bichette, and Guerrero, again, even though I think Vladdy's in a bit of a different category now, they're not going to the playoffs. It's just not possible unless those guys hit.
You surprised that the Jays haven't, and I don't know if they've had discussions with him or not. Are you surprised that Danny Jansen hasn't received a little more attention from the front office in terms of a long-term contract? I understand there's a health issue there.
Yeah.
But Danny, he's a catcher. He's having a terrific offensive season. I don't know. It's always kind of surprised me. And I do think they value him. Anytime you talk to anybody around that organization, they love him. I mean, beyond the normal love that an organization has for its players, they really like him.
As they should. All right. You know him. I know him.
Yeah.
If you're picking leaders and best liked guys in the clubhouse, he's right near the top. We both know that. And, he's a lifer in this organization and all that sort of thing. And that's, I guess that question kind of leads me back to my last answer. Sometimes the only thing I know is what I don't know. I have no idea if they've had conversations. Absolutely none. It's possible they've had none. It's possible they made him an offer and his side turned it down. It's possible he went to them and said, or his agent went to them and said, let's talk. And they said, let's table it for now. I have no idea. So I would love to see Danny Jansen re-signed. I think he's a big, big part of this team. Obviously, he's had trouble staying healthy, but it's been, if you want to call getting hit by a pitch fluky stuff, it's been fluky stuff more often than not. And you'd just love to see this guy be able to get 450 to 500 at bats one year and see what the numbers are like. And going forward, and it's only happened once, right? He DH'd, but I would imagine if he keeps swinging the bat well, and I don't know that we can expect this to continue, but if he keeps swinging the bat well, you got to find, a few more at bats for him as a DH. But then, of course, that means Justin Turner, if he's in the lineup, he's got to be at third base, and there's a domino effect and a trickle down and all that. But beyond 2024, I'd love to see them keep him. And maybe next year, the DH spot is a little bit different. 3 or 4 guys are going through it. And Jansen can get 350 at bats as the catcher and another 180 as the DH or something like that. And then maybe we see what kind of year he can put up if he can stay healthy. So I don't know if they've talked to him. That's not the kind of stuff. That's not the kind of information I'm able to get. That's not the kind of information they're giving out to the talking head on TV. So, but if I had a vote, I would love to see Danny Jansen sign to a multi-year deal before he becomes a free agent. They've got the exclusivity now, but at this point, he's so close to free agency. We have to remember it takes both sides to agree on the deal. And if you're Danny Jansen, do you want to say, hey, it's only a few months away? Why don't I at least get out there and see what's out there for me? And I can always come back if this is where it's meant to be.
The issues we're seeing with the bullpen, how much of that do you think is directly attributable to Jimmy Garcia's back issue? And I'm hoping, I would presume everything that John Schneider said yesterday made me think that they're probably going to have positive news tomorrow on Jimmy Garcia. But how much of the bullpen's issues are related directly to his lack of availability, or are there some deeper issues there, do you think?
Well, I think there are deeper issues because if you go back to before he had this back issue, you look at the two lefties in Genesis Cabrera and Tim Meza, and they've both been up and down this season. Everybody can see that, and they'd be the first two guys to admit to that. Jordan Romano and Eric Swanson start the year on the IL. Swanson hopefully is getting there and can get back to what he was last year when he was terrific as a setup guy. And Romano's been getting the saves, but there's been some hard contact and a run here, a run there, that sort of thing. So all of those things predate Garcia being out. I think losing Chad Green hurt them too. It's not that he's become the forgotten man, but we haven't talked about him very much. And I can't remember what city they were in, but he walked out of the clubhouse and it was like that was the day he was going to throw, and they were going to see if he was available or if he had to go on the IL. And that was like 3 weeks ago. So it's gone beyond the minimum stint. And to my knowledge, he hasn't gotten off a mound yet. So now we're looking at a month or more. So I think it's multi-layered. Nate Pearson has had very good moments and then some bumpy ones. They're not getting the consistency of the performances that they got last year. Bowden Francis going on the IL, Yariel Rodriguez going on the IL. It's been a lot. So the bullpen, I think, has had issues on a number of levels. If you were going to say to me, what has to happen for this team to make the playoffs? I think we all know what the first one is. They got to hit more. I think number 3 would be that 5th spot in the rotation, whether it's Alec Manoah or somebody else, just to get somebody who can keep them in games, give them a chance to win the game. Number 2 on the list to me is the bullpen. It's, as you know, it's so emotionally deflating when you get a lead, can't hold a lead. We saw that in 2021 when they had a great offense and in the first half of the year couldn't hold leads. They tried this guy and that guy, and it just didn't work out. And that's the year they went out and got Richards and Simber in June or whenever it was. But I think there are a number of issues in the bullpen. I'm hoping Cabrera and Meza have turned a corner. Swanson continues to improve. And listen, the guy's had a really tough couple of months. I mean, a couple of months that no parent should have to go through, right? And had a forearm issue as well. So hopefully he can turn the corner. And whether it's Green, Rodriguez, Francis, hopefully these guys come back soon. The Jimmy Garcia thing, they've gone 10 days without him, which I think was 7 games because they had 3 off days. But to be a man short and the guy who's been your best reliever this year for 7 games, that's asking a lot. And obviously, at this point, tomorrow, he's either got to be 100% good to go or he's on the IL. To be honest with you, I thought they might have reached that point in Philadelphia. That it had kind of run its course. I'm surprised it's gone this long without a decision having been made one way or the other.
Ken Rosenthal had an article today in The Athletic. We've been talking about it a little bit in the show talked about it with Shine with Travis Sawchik as well. And he was talking about, the difficulty we've seen this year with a lot of the elite hitting prospects who've been called up by their teams. And yes, it is a small sample size. I get that. But, he's talking about Jackson Holliday famously. We saw it to a certain degree here with Addison Barger. But one of the points Ken's article made, and it was really interesting to me, and it also, I think, gets to the issue maybe we're seeing with the Jays in terms of pitching at AAA, is a lot of executives are saying the pitching at AAA is just not as good as it's been in the past. And consequently, it's almost like some of the stuff you are seeing with these prospects might be fool's gold. Now, again, small sample size, and no one's saying that Jackson Holliday can't hit or all that, but I'm wondering if maybe, there's a lot of focus on Orelvis Martinez, obviously. And if this lineup continues to scuffle, there's going to be greater focus. Do you think maybe that's kind of a cautionary tale for us, Danny? And again, this gets to the fact the organization knows what's going on there beyond the numbers, right?
Right. Yeah. And if we're talking about Orelvis Martinez specifically, and I know fans, and I totally get it, focus like 98% of their energy on offense.
Mm-hmm.
Defense matters too. And I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think Martinez has made like 9 errors at second base this year. It's a relatively new position for him. I don't think anybody ever thinks he's going to be a gifted fielder. They just want to kind of get him up to adequate before they call him up. I'm not saying he's not going to be here in 2 weeks, but if he's up, he's got to play 5-6 days a week. You're not bringing him up to play twice a week. In terms of why it is so tough for young guys, I agree that AAA starting pitching, to me, like there's only one Paul Skenes, right? Like there are a lot of guys who have never gotten to the majors, will never get to the majors. I look at the Buffalo game notes every night before I do the game. I check who's starting and I look at his ERA, and it's an inflated offensive environment too. In AAA right now, and that's some of it too. The challenge system of the automatic balls and strikes, that shouldn't be discounted as a big reason why offense is up at AAA, and maybe when some of these guys come to the majors. I've talked to Davis Schneider about this on several occasions. A pitch that at AAA was called a ball is getting called a strike up at the top of the zone more often than not in the big leagues. So if you're Schneider, instead of taking the pitch and waiting for the pitcher to be forced into the zone, now you got to swing at a pitch that you're not great at hitting. And that changes the tenor of the whole at bat. So it's not like Jackson Holliday is not going to hit. And I believe Addison Barger is going to hit in the major leagues. I'm not worried at all or putting too much weight into 1 for 18 or anything like that. So, but I think Martinez is very likely to be here this year. I think when Vladdy was down in the minors, everybody was screaming and yelling for him to come up. And I remember them saying it's not just the offense. The entire game has to improve a little bit. And I think that's where Orelvis Martinez is right now. That having been said, again, 2 or 3 weeks from now, I mean, if they get thumped pretty good by the Twins, Orioles, and Rays, really get thumped and the record looks ugly, I think they're going to be sitting in the back offices contemplating a lot of things that they didn't think they'd be contemplating in mid to late May. And some of them may be big. There may be some surprises coming. It's hard to make a big trade early, but maybe it's another team who's got a problem and the vibes aren't great and they're underachieving, and maybe a big trade opens up a spot or something like that. But I think Martinez will be here before this year is out, and I think he'll hit. And just on another side note, I really wish there was a spot on this team for Spencer Horwitz. I think Spencer Horwitz is a major league player. I think he gives them a different kind of hitter. I know there's not a spot for him now. I get it. You don't want to call him up and have him play once a week because Vladdy's at first and Turner's the DH most of the time. But a left-handed bat with a 460, 470 on base percentage, whatever he's got. I know he doesn't have a lot of power, but I think he could, in the future, and maybe it's not that far away, help this team if he's given the opportunity.
Would you at all be concerned about bringing up a prospect like Orelvis Martinez into a situation where things aren't going well? I mean, I've always kind of struggled with that. I mean, I guess the perfect scenario is, hey, the guy comes up and the team's playing well and there's a positive environment. I don't know about bringing a guy up into a sort of sour environment where the team's not winning and maybe you've had a managerial change and the fans are grumpy. I get it's the classic baseball dilemma, right? But how do you feel about that? Do you think that maybe that's overstated?
It's a very interesting question because you don't want a guy to come up and again, if the vibes aren't good or and I'm not saying this has happened, but if guys are grumpy or checked out a little bit, you don't want a young player learning that, right? And I think the leadership group the Blue Jays have, and I'm going to leave out a couple, but in my mind, that would include Jansen and Turner and Gausman and Bassett and others. But like those are the first ones that come to mind for me. And then you got like Varsho plays every game like they're never going to let him play again, right? Like it's the last day he ever gets to play, and you can't have better vibes than Clement and Schneider. So I think it's a really interesting question that you pose, but I don't think that's a thing on this. I don't think that would be the tipping point for me or the tiebreaker for me. in terms of whether or not to bring him up. I think it's got to be the number one thing is, do you think he's ready? And the number two thing is, do you have a good plan on how to use him and how much you can use him at the big league level? And I think once they check off those couple of boxes, he's probably coming. But you know what, like there could be another move before that, and Martinez doesn't come. Like, and there's some talk, and the organization hasn't said this, but that Daniel Vogelback is on what's called an advanced consent contract, 45 days, prorated salary before you have to commit to the whole year. I don't know if he is or he isn't, but if he is, you can count the days and see that 45 is coming up soon. And maybe they make a move there, but maybe it's not Orelvis Martinez. Maybe it's Nathan Lucas, because they say, well, we don't have the at-bats, so we don't want Martinez or Barger to be playing once or twice a week. So I think right now they're still kind of tinkering around the edges and trying to get healthy. But again, I think the next 10 days against those three good teams are going to be really significant in terms of forks in the road for this team. Maybe not only this year, maybe beyond this year, right? You're going to make some decisions this year that will obviously impact you beyond this season as well.
Dan, you've been really generous with your time today. Thanks so much, man.
My pleasure. It's an off day. I got all the time in the world for 8 more minutes till my 5-year-old comes home from school. Then I'm off the clock.
Oh, we'll let you go now. Thanks, man. Be well.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Take care. Dan Shulman, the voice of the Blue Jays. He'll have the call tomorrow as the Jays open a 3-game series against the Minnesota Twins at the Rogers Center. And Danny's right. I mean, it's Twins, Orioles, and Rays. You kind of look for different checkpoints along the way, and I think Dan's hitting something there. I think we will have a better understanding of how the decision makers around the Blue Jays really, really, really feel about this team after these next 9 games or so are done. The Orioles, they're amongst the very best teams in baseball. The Twins, as we've said, have played well, and the Rays are the Rays. And it'll be interesting to take a look at the Jays' record at the end of this run of games. And I think Danny's right. At that point, that's maybe where some decisions will need to be made. It's hasn't been the start we expected. And I think these next few games or so will be telling. Again, tomorrow, first of 3 games between the Jays and the Twins at the Rogers Center. John Schneider, the manager of the Blue Jays, Thad Levine, general manager of the Minnesota Twins, and Justin Turner of the Blue Jays, they will all join us tomorrow on Blair and Barker. Kevin Barker will be back, and as always, the back leg line. Every Friday we go to it. Your questions, your comments, 416-413-3959. So that's it for us. Of course, it's a big day for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Sheldon Keefe has been relieved of his job as head coach of the Leafs. Wonder what Kipper and Bourne have to say about that. We shall find out. They're next. Have a great day.